Anita, are we ready to
Yeah,
start?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for joining everyone. Sahil, over to you.
Okay, great. So before we begin, wanted to update you all on something exciting that we have planned. So I would view the audience for this video series as someone that's relatively sophisticated with personal finance, that's interested in learning about how to analyze individual stocks. So I would categorize this as a pretty advanced listener. Um, we're going to be doing a video series for complete beginners also. And we're going to kick that off this week. Exact date is still TBD, but we're thinking around Wednesday or Thursday time frame. So stay tuned on that. If you're on our WhatsApp groups, we'll let you know when that's scheduled. Please forward that to anyone who you think could benefit from basically starting from first principles on personal finance. So we're going to really start from the beginning. You know, how do you save? Why should you save? How much should you save? What is the role of your portfolio, when to borrow, when not to borrow. This series that we're planning is going to deal with a lot of these kind of questions, which we think will be very, very useful to a lot of our members. And again, this has come through member feedback. So please keep that stuff coming in. We will design content that our members request, and that's how really we can be very useful to everybody. So look forward to kicking off this new series and stay tuned for details on that. Okay, so why don't we kick off into this presentation. So this is session 5 of Stocks Zero to Hero. We've done a lot, and let's start with a quick recap of what we did last time. And in case anyone's not caught up, all our videos are on our YouTube channel, so they can find the back videos there. In any case, quick recap. So last time we focused on understanding how we measure the earnings power of a company. And our biggest tool there was the income statement. And we discussed something around trend analysis. So that is basically looking for trends in the income statement to see how the earnings power of a company has grown over the past and what its key components are. And that will tell us what we should think about for the future of the company and what kind of earnings growth we can expect. There were two tools we discussed there. I'll just briefly recap them. So one was a compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, which again basically allows us to get a single average growth rate for any number over time. And this is very useful to us, as we covered in the last session, because it gives us a single average growth for something that could have a lot of noise over a long period of time. The second thing we discussed were margins. Margins give us the ability to measure profitability of a company and allow us to compare across different companies. So to see how well a company converts revenue into profit. So we cover those two tools, and now we're going to move on to the balance sheet. Now, the balance sheet is going to help us uncover mainly a different topic. So one is the earnings growth. The second is the risk of a company, and the balance sheet's really going to help us unpack the risk of an investment in terms of financial risks that the company faces. So we did a very quick intro to the balance sheet. I want to recap that again here. So what does a balance sheet do? It measures what a company owns, which is the assets of a company. It measures what a company owes to other people. Those are the liabilities of the company. And then it measures the difference of the asset and the liability, which is called the net worth. And you may have heard this term for individuals, right? It measures the wealth of an individual. If someone has a high net worth, he's a high net worth individual. He owns a lot more than he owes to other people. So he's wealthy. Similarly, for a company, a wealthy company is a company that has a lot more assets than liabilities and has a high net worth, therefore. So that is a little definitional background on the balance sheet. Now let's dig in a little bit deeper in this class. So what we're going to cover today, We're going to actually look at Britannia's balance sheet. We're going to look at the asset side of the balance sheet. We're going to analyze the key assets. And then we're going to understand the liabilities side of the balance sheet and understand the key liabilities on Britannia's balance sheet. We'll also update our question list that we started in the last series that we're going to attempt to answer in future series as we think about whether Britannia is a good investment or not. And then we'll close out the session with a quick discussion of what we're going to do in the next class, which is we're going to actually compare Britannia on all these ratios on the income statement and balance sheet to peers. And that's going to help us determine how is Britannia doing relative to Hindustan Levers, Nestle India, Dabur, and other CPG, FMCG companies in the space. And that's going to tell us, okay, it's doing better or worse, and how is its PE ratio? Is the PE ratio better or worse? And then we're going to get a sense of, is it a buy, a sell, or a hold, right? So now we're actually getting pretty far into the analysis, and a lot of the number crunching is going to stop, and a lot of the thinking now is going to start coming out, and judgments and the art of investing that we talked about in the first series. Investing cannot be reduced to just number crunching. It is a lot of judgment and art as well. And that's actually the fun part of investing, which we're now going to see in the next few sessions. So it'll get pretty cool from here on out. Okay. So balance sheet analysis. So what is it all about? So one is risk, right? And we've discussed risk, but what do we mean by risk? So we're talking about a very specific kind of risk when we're talking about the balance sheet. We're talking about the financial risk of a company. So the balance sheet is not going to tell us what the operating risks of a company are. So for example, I could have a business where the CEO is so important to the company and there's no succession plan. And if the CEO gets ill or needs to retire, who's going to run the company? That's a risk also, right? But that won't be something that the balance sheet will tell us. That's an operating risk. The balance sheet instead is going to tell us what are the financial risks of the company. How big are its savings? How much does it owe to other people? And do we foresee any problems with the company meeting those liabilities if it owes money to other people? And so there's a very particular category of risk. So one example that I like to just illustrate the intuitive feel of this risk. Let's consider two people, okay? One that earns 1 crore a year, has zero in savings and spends everything he or she earns on fancy cars, homes, and has taken out lots of loans to pay for these things. Now let's consider another person that earns 10 lakhs a year, saves 50% of that, and has no borrowings and has a very low cost lifestyle. When we look at these two people, even though the first person earns more, right? The second person is much less risky because they're living their life in a way that provides cushion in case something goes wrong. That's exactly what we're trying to do with the business. We're trying to attempt to see how much cushion this company has. So the income statement told us about how much the company's earnings were. Are they earning 1 crore or 10 lakhs, right? The balance sheet is going to tell us how well are they saving and how much do they owe to other people, and therefore how much financial risk are they taking. The second part that the balance sheet can tell us about, and this is much rarer, but I'm discussing it here because it does come up from time to time, but it's pretty rare. It can also tell us about hidden value in a business. When you buy a business, you don't just get a share of the earnings that that business has, right? You also get a share of anything that that business owns. So let's take an example here. Pretend I had an analog photography store in Connaught Place. Now, as we know, everyone is moving to taking photos on their phones now and digital cameras now. So if I have a store that's selling analog cameras and film, right, chances are my store is not doing well, right, in terms of generating earnings. But let's pretend I owned my real estate and it's a very big store, 5,000 square feet, right? Even though my company is not generating a lot in earnings, its balance sheet is very valuable because it has a hidden gem in there. It owns very valuable real estate. So sometimes we'll see businesses whose earnings may not be very high, but they may be sitting on some very valuable assets. So I'm just mentioning this as an aside. It's pretty rare. It does come up on occasion. And this is something you should just park in your brain as something that you should look out for when looking at balance sheets. Don't just look for risk. Also look for something valuable on the balance sheet. And Britannia does, has some investment properties and all those kind of things. I don't think they're going to meet the criteria for hidden value, but we'll take a look when we start answering these questions. So, okay. Okay. So let's understand balance sheet risk in a little more detail. So as a shareholder, I get a piece of the company's earnings, but it also must use its earnings to pay back money it owes to other people. If the company has taken a loan, right, it has to repay that loan over time, right? And let's say the company gets into trouble, and trouble can come from lots of different areas. So like take Nestle India, when it ran into that lead issue with Maggie noodles, they had all kinds of regulatory issues and weren't able to sell their products for a period. So their earnings were impacted for some time frame, right? So you could have a fire in your factory. You could have a macroeconomic shock like we're going through now. So businesses can run into unexpected events that impact its earnings. And what we care about as investors is understanding if these events happen and the earnings get hit, is this company going to have any trouble paying back money it owes to other people? Because if it is, then we're running the risk that they could go bankrupt. Because when a company doesn't pay back its bills to lenders, lenders can put the company into bankruptcy. And when a company is put into bankruptcy, typically the shareholders are wiped out, which means they get zero return on their investment. So this is a worst case scenario that we always want to avoid when investing in companies. So that's the kind of risk we're talking about when we're trying to analyze balance sheet risk. Okay, so let's analyze Britannia's balance sheet. So for people that want to follow along, it's page 48 of the PDF, and it's on the left-hand side, right next to the income statement. So let's just take a look. Let's take it in. There are a lot of numbers here as usual, but we're going to simplify this and focus on the key items. So as again, with the income statement, there are two columns of numbers. There is a 2019 column here, and there is a 2018 column, right? And then I also have notes over here, which if I don't understand a line, I can read that note and it'll tell me what that line means. So whenever you're lost on a balance sheet, don't worry, there's a note that will explain exactly what is in that line. So that's a good key for you to figure out what certain line items mean. The other thing you'll notice is the balance sheet, as we discussed in the last class, is divided into two sections. Top section is called the asset side, right? So that's this section up here. And I know you can't read the text, don't worry. I blew it up into a bigger chart on the next page, but I'm just showing you the big chunks right now. So don't worry if you can't read the exact values and everything. The second part is equity and liabilities. Now here we have another example of financial jargon. Equity in this case on the balance sheet just means net worth. So when you see equity, it means net worth on the balance sheet. Just some companies call it equity, some companies call it net worth. So as we discussed, the equity is equal to the difference of assets and liabilities. So why does the balance sheet balance? Because on one side you have assets and on the other side you have liabilities plus equity. And if equity is the difference between assets and liabilities, then it's always going to equal the assets, right? Equities plus liabilities will always equal the assets, which is why it's called a balance sheet. It always is balanced. Okay, so how are we going to make sense of this? We're going to simplify it. We're going to focus on the key line items that we care about in our analysis. So I'm not going to go through every line item. In an advanced series we do for people that really want to get deep into financial analysis, which we may do at a certain point. We may talk about working capital analysis and some of the other line items we look for in investing. But for 95% of investment opportunities, You can just ignore working capital trends because most of the time they don't signal anything. That's a really advanced topic that is for the 5% of cases where it can tell you something about the company. So we're going to ignore that for now, but we'll deal with it in a future class. Okay, so we're going to simplify, we're going to focus on assets, and then we're going to focus on liabilities. So let's focus on assets first. So remember, on the asset side, I'm focused on what the company owns, right? And specifically, the three things I'm really interested in are the three things that are most able to be monetized for me, right? So what do I own that I can easily convert into cash if I need to, if my company runs into trouble? So the first is cash, right? Cash, I don't need to convert into cash. It's cash sitting in my bank account. So that's very easy for me to access if I need to, right? The second is investments. If I've invested my cash into a mutual fund or a fixed deposit or bonds or something, then I can always sell those investments to raise cash if I need it as a business, right? And then the third is property, plant, and equipment, right? So this is machinery or equipment or property or offices or anything that I can always monetize if I run into trouble, right? If I own my office building, I can always sell it to someone and lease it back if I need and to free up funds for my company. So why do I care about this? Because I want to know how much in value the company is sitting with in terms of if it needs to access funds, can it access funds, right? Maybe there's a bad market and it can't raise money, right? Externally, maybe it'll have to sell something to survive a downfall or something that went wrong. Does it have those assets to sell? So it's going to tell me that. Then it's also going to tell me I am an owner of this business, as we discussed, and anything it owns, I also own, right? So maybe there's some hidden value in some of this. Maybe it owns a very expensive office building, right? That is a source of hidden value. Maybe it's sitting on lots of cash, more cash than it needs to sit on, right? In which case it could pay back some of this cash to shareholders at some point. So it also could be sitting on too much cash. So understanding the assets are going to tell us those two things. One, does it have access to rainy day funds? Two, is it sitting on potentially hidden value? Okay. So now let's try to make sense of the asset side. So I took the big asset side balance sheet and I compressed it and blew it up for you guys so we can read the numbers together. Otherwise it's too small. And essentially what I did is anything that's dotted here, like total property, plant and equipment, investments and investments in cash, these are the line items that I care about. The rest are beyond the scope of this video series. And frankly, deferred tax assets and all are very, very unimportant. I mean, they're maybe 1 out of 1,000 investments you deal with that will become important, but most of the time it's not important. This working capital line items, inventories and trade receivables, again, maybe 5 out of 100 investments that become pretty important. So you can safely ignore those for now. We'll deal with them in advanced classes. So just focus on the dotted lines for now. And what I did is I had to collect certain things from the balance sheet to add up into these lines. So you're not actually going to see a name here that says total property, plant and equipment on Britannia's balance sheet. I added up 3 lines that represented property, plant and equipment in separate lines, right? So that I could total it up for my analysis because I care about how much property it's holding. So I added up those property holdings that I saw on the balance sheet. So I did the same for investments and I did the same for investments cash. So one thing we need to discuss here is why is investments cash repeated twice, right? Why is there an investments in the top and why is there investments cash at the bottom? So these two totals here and here are the answer. The balance sheet is divided into 2 types of assets and liabilities. One is current assets and one is non-current assets. And this basically tells us how long or short term something is. So let's take an example of a fixed deposit. Let's say Britannia invested in a fixed deposit. Let's say that fixed deposit was 1 year. So current asset is defined as short term, meaning less than or equal to 1 year of maturity. So that would show up in my balance sheet as a current asset because it's 1 year in duration. Now let's pretend I invested in a 2 year fixed deposit. That would not show up in my current assets, that would show up in my non-current assets. So that tells you how short-term or long-term assets are. And generally, the reason we care about short-term versus long-term is short-term assets are easier to sell because they're going to mature soon, right? But again, that's a relatively advanced topic for now. I just say focus on collecting all the investment numbers together, collecting all the property, plant, and equipment numbers together, collecting the cash together so we can focus on how much value is in this business on the asset side. Okay. So what we're going to do with these numbers, because right now it looks like Britannia has a lot of value, right? These numbers are in crores, by the way. So it looks like Britannia has a lot of investments in cash, right? So if we see here, it has 1,000 crores of non-current investments, and it has 1,900 crores approximately of current investments. So if we add the two, it has almost 3 crores of investments or cash, right? That sounds like a very large number. But how do we know? Because Britannia is also a very big company. So what we're going to do in the next class is compare this to other companies in Britannia's industry. At some point, you will get an intuitive flavor for is this a lot or is this little. But when you're first starting out, you're really going to need to compare to get an understanding because you're not going to know, okay, is 3,000 crores of cash good or bad? The best way to find out is to compare to others. So we'll start doing that in the next class. The other thing that we notice is it looks like if we just do a very simple calculation of percent of total assets here, which I did. So all the things Britannia owns, it looks like 25% of that is property, plant, and equipment. And then if we add up the investments of 18% and 33%, we have roughly 50%. So roughly 50% of them are sitting in investments. So all the things that Britannia owns, 75% of them are relatively saleable. So if I run into trouble, I'll probably be able to sell things to help me manage, right? But we're going to want to study this deeper, and we'll do that in future classes. What are these investments? Are these investments in risky mutual funds? Are they investment in FDs? Are they investment in government bonds? We're going to want to understand what exactly these things are and how these numbers compare to competitors. So we'll do that in the next class. Okay, now let's go to the liability side. So what we care about on the liability side is a few things. So one is how much has Britannia borrowed from lenders, right? Because anything is borrowed from lenders, it'll have to pay back. Does Britannia have any contingent liabilities? So we briefly discussed contingent liabilities in the last class. But to recap, a contingent liability is something the company might have to pay in the future. So let's say Britannia was being sued because there was some product recall that made some people ill, right? And it was being sued in court. If Britannia thought that they were going to have to pay some money in to settle that lawsuit, they would show that in the balance sheet as a contingent liability. So that is money they may owe to people. So we also want to look for things like that. And then we want to know what is the company's net worth, right? Is it a wealthy company or a poor company, basically? And why do we care about this? Again, the company has to pay back its liabilities, right? So at some point, those liabilities are going to come due, and we have to make sure the company can deal with them and they won't go bankrupt. So that's the liability side, what we care about. Now, I'm going to preface this a little bit by saying that Britannia has a very, very clean balance sheet, and not every company has this clean a balance sheet. And I will deal in the last class of this series. I will talk about tips for analyzing companies with messier balance sheets. Okay. How do you know if a company's borrowed too much? How do you know if it'll be able to pay back its liabilities? The answer is you don't know perfectly, but we use ratios to try and tell us how to do that. And I'll discuss that at the end of this class because it's not something we're going to cover with Britannia because it has such a clean balance sheet. But don't worry, we will talk about how to do that. So let's make sense of the liabilities side. Okay, so the first line that you will see that I've dotted in red that we care about is equity. Equity again is a synonym for net worth, right, on the balance sheet. And it's telling us the difference between assets and liabilities. So it's telling us that Britannia has 4,000 crores more of assets than it has liabilities, which tells us there's a fair bit of cushion that the company has in paying back its liabilities. If it needs to sell assets, it probably can to pay back any liabilities that it has. The second thing we care about again is borrowings, right? So again, sorry, this is mislabeled. This should say total non-current liabilities, not assets. Okay, so apologies for that on this table. But again, the liabilities side is also broken into current and non-current liabilities. So a current liability is something you have to pay back within a year. So if I've taken a 5-year loan from you and my loan is now in the 4th year, so that means I have 1 more year left to pay you back, it would move into my current liabilities. But if I have time to pay you back, it would be on my non-current liabilities. So that's why you see borrowings in 2 places. So what we can see here is that Britannia has virtually zero in borrowings. Okay, so in terms of financial risk, what we're seeing in this company is that it has a very, very clean balance sheet, almost no borrowings, and a fair degree of equity and no contingent liabilities either. I went through these other line items and I didn't see any contingent liabilities that we should be factoring into our analysis. So from my perspective, first read of the balance sheet, it looks very, very clean, right? And so that's telling me that at least from a financial risk perspective, there doesn't seem to be much we need to really worry about with Britannia. We'll need to compare to competitors and all those things to see and double check how it stacks up. But it looks like a very clean balance sheet. And again, we will talk about how to deal with companies that do not have such a clean balance sheet because this is exceptionally clean. I mean, I am surprised that they have such little borrowings. So let's update our question list now from our review of the balance sheet. Okay, so if you remember, we had some questions we needed to answer on the income statement as we start digging in further. Now we've also looked at the balance sheet, right? So now we're going to have to come up with questions for the balance sheet that we need to answer when we're determining if Britannia is a good investment or not. So one is the rainy day fund, right? So we noticed that Britannia had a lot of cash and investments, but it's also a big business. So does it have enough or does it have too much cash and investments for its business? If it has too much, there may be some hidden value in Britannia, right? So also, what are those investments invested in, right? Is it invested in risky assets or is it invested in safe assets? So we need to also understand that. Britannia also has some property holdings. We're going to want to understand what those are and is there any potentially more hidden value in those property holdings? So we're going to try and answer that also. Also, Britannia has no borrowings. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? So it's good from a financial risk perspective, but we're going to also want to understand what Britannia's competitors are doing. Are they using more borrowings to invest in their business and grow faster as a result? So that actually brings me to another point I want to discuss. Is borrowing bad? If borrowing brings risk into a business, should we only invest in companies like Britannia that are debt free? And the answer to this is absolutely not. So in the US, when I worked for a private equity fund, one of the ways that we made investments was looking for companies that were not borrowing enough, because borrowing is a very efficient way to invest in your company if you can get cheap loans, right? So the answer to this is complicated, right? So let's think about some of the things that we can look at, right? So first, the answer to the question, borrowing can be very valuable. So what are the key questions in figuring out if borrowing makes sense or not? So one is, what does the debt cost you? How much does it cost for you to borrow? If I am borrowing at 16% interest rate, then maybe it doesn't make sense for me to borrow. But if I'm borrowing at 3% interest rate, maybe it makes a lot of sense for me to borrow, right? So that's one part of the equation. The next is, what am I going to do with the money that I borrow? If I'm borrowing at 16% and I'm investing in something that only gives me 10%, right? Then I'm losing money when I borrow. So that makes no sense, right? If on the other hand, I'm borrowing at 5% and I'm investing in something at 10%, then borrowing is a way for me to grow my business, right? So let's say that I have a chain of retail stores. Let's say I'm DMart, okay? And I want to open 100 more stores, but I don't have the capital to do that, right? I can go to the bank and borrow, and I'll pay some interest rate. Now, if I expect that those stores will give me more earnings than I have to pay back in interest to the bank on the amount I borrowed, then borrowing makes a lot of sense. So let's take a concrete example that will make it easier for people to understand intuitively. Should I borrow $100,000 to fund a foreign MBA program? So I can't answer this without doing analysis, right? First, I need to ask, what is my interest rate on my loans? Am I able to raise money at a cheap rate or expensive rate? Second, what are my earnings today without doing that MBA? And then what will that change to if I get an MBA? And if the answer is my earnings will change a lot, and even and my borrowing costs are not too high, then I should borrow to invest in my MBA, right? So borrowing can be something that's very valuable to a business. So maybe after we finish our analysis, our conclusion is going to be that Britannia should have borrowed more, right? The second piece that we're going to have to look for when people borrow is, you should always have buffers. So you may expect to get a 10% return on something you invest in, but what if you only get a 5% return? Or what if you get a 2% return? Or what if you get a negative return, right? You always need to ask yourself, will I still be able to pay back my borrowings, right? So let's take the education example with the MBA. I may think I'm going to get the top job out of my batch, right? In which case doing the MBA makes sense. But what if I don't? What if I get the middle job out of my batch? What if I get the worst job out of my batch, right? Will I still be able to pay my loan comfortably? People that make the best decisions financially ask themselves these sort of questions. The more questions you ask, the better you're going to get a sense of, is something a good risk or a bad risk? And so the takeaways as you analyze companies, and we'll get into more detail on this in, again, the last session when we're focusing on my tips for how you can now do this on your own. We're going to talk about how to analyze this with companies. So how do we evaluate the risk reward of a company that's borrowed? How do we figure out if a company can repay its loans or not? How do we disaster plan for companies like that? So we will cover that in future sessions, in probably the last session in this course. Okay, so next week we're going to start comparing Britannia to peers. So how do we do that? So it's the same way you compare, let's say you're trying to buy a flat, right? And you want to compare metrics across flats. No flat is the same. Every flat has individual nuances, right? Similarly, every company has individual nuances. So what we try to do is compare those ratios that we've been calculating. So the gross margin of company A was X, gross margin of company B was Y. What does that tell you about company A versus company B? Company A's operating margin was X, company B's operating margin was Y. What can we tell about that, right? And these comparisons are then going to tell us how a company looks relative to its peers. And then we're going to say, okay, I feel like Britannia is better or worse than its peers, but its PE ratio is higher or lower. Is there a disconnect there? If there's a disconnect, then it tells us something very interesting about the stock. If there's no disconnect, then it tells us probably the company is fairly valued. So that's how we're going to kind of make our decisions as we start doing this comparison analysis. So now I'm really going to get into the art side of things and focus on making judgments. So next time, what are we going to do? We're going to do that comparative analysis, as I said, but also we'll do just a very quick review of the cash flow statement. I know I'd said that I was going to do it in this class, but as I did the presentation, I realized there was a lot of material here, and I want to make sure that it's understandable and that we don't cover too much. So we'll do a very, very quick review of the cash flow statement. I don't think it's particularly important for the majority of investments. So we won't do a very in-depth analysis on it, but enough so you understand it. We'll do the comparative analysis of Britannia versus peers, and we're going to hone our question list based on this analysis and start whittling away at answering questions and making judgments about what's going on and understanding the strategy of Britannia also. So with that, let's move to question and answers.
Okay, so the first question is, value is hidden because the asset is listed at cost or market value, whichever is lower. Is that correct?
Yes, so that's a great point. And it's something that I probably should have covered. So very good point. And this is why I love Q&A. If I miss something, then everyone benefits from having questions like this. So the reason value is hidden is exactly what the member said. Typically, the balance sheet is listed at cost. There are times when it's listed at market value, but because it's typically listed at cost. So this means if I bought something a really long time ago, let's say I bought a piece of property 15 years ago in Bandra Kurla complex, a little office space there. Now, clearly that property is more valuable today than when I bought it, but it will be sitting on my balance sheet. The amount that will be shown there will be the amount I paid 15 years ago, not the value today. So that's why it's hidden. It is, as the questioner correctly stated, it's typically hidden, listed at cost.
Okay, so Britannia added about 730 crores of investments. How did it do that? Sorry, not just investments, but investments equal to property plus plant and equipment.
Yeah, so there are different ways it could have done that. And that's where the cash flow statement comes into play. So the first is Britannia generates cash in the business, right? So when it runs its business, it essentially, the earnings it generates, it will pay some of those in the form of dividends, but it will also keep some of those earnings, as we discussed, to reinvest in the business. So it could have increased its investments by retaining some of those earnings and reinvesting them in the business and keeping them on their balance sheet for the future. So that's one way that it could have increased its investments. The second is it always could have sold some assets and converted them to cash, right? So if, for example, they had some non-core division or something, they could have sold that, gotten proceeds from it, and then moved it into investments and cash. So that's another way they could have done it also. But typically my expectation is a lot of that movement in investments came from the actual cash the business generated over that period.
Okay, so
but
when we
explore that.
Yeah, so so Britannia said it was trying to become a food company from a bakery company. Do we see any evidence of this transformation, and how is it going?
Yeah, so this is going to deal with the more strategic analysis of the company, which we're going to start doing from next session and sessions thereafter. It's exactly the right question, and we're going to see if we can actually get data to see how it's going, right? One is believing what the management team says about it. But the other is embedded in our annual reports. We can oftentimes find additional detail that's not there in the income statement. So for example, we actually may be able to find product category wise sales, which will allow us to see how is the products outside of bakery doing? Are they actually gaining share or not, right? So that question we will answer as we start answering the questions that came out of our income statement analysis. But just park that. It's a very good question and one that we'll have to answer.
Okay. Isn't inventory, aren't inventory turns important for perishable commodities like bakery, milk products, etc.?
Yes, they are important. So inventory is a working capital line item for beginners, and it's one of those balance sheet items that can tell you something pretty important if there are changes in, as the listener's saying, inventory turns or not. The truth is, when you look at the number of times in my investment career that working capital has made a big difference in terms of understanding and investment decisions, it's not a very high percentage of time. So I would say roughly 5 out of every 100 investments I looked at, something interesting came out of the working capital analysis. Because especially in FMCG companies like this, there's so much that impacts the inventory turns that it's hard to really gauge a lot from it. So for example, product categories with faster turns could be growing, and that's why inventory turns are moving. And you just don't have the granularity to be able to draw very interesting things out of it. But in our advanced class, we'll talk more about working capital and some examples where I was able to see something in working capital that made me make an investment decision. So I'll highlight some of those in the advanced class that we do. But for now, for beginners, I'd say that inventory turns and things, while important for certain industries and businesses, for the vast majority of businesses, you can safely sort of park that as a second order criteria, in my opinion.
Okay, I think that's all for the questions. One question has just come in.
Yeah.
In the key takeaways from Berkshire Hathaway's AGM, okay, so it's unrelated, but anyways,
Sure.
Berkshire Hathaway's AGM research document, it was mentioned that Buffett's time scale for long-term is not a few years, but a few decades. Does it mean that complete market recovery will take decades?
So good question. I think the answer to that is nobody knows. And I think Buffett's point here was, if you look at large periods of time, events, even like the Great Depression, right, in 1929, look like little blips on a stock price chart. So is Buffett convinced that the stock market will be higher in 2 years, 5 years, or even 6, 7 years, or even 10 years than it is today? He's not absolutely convinced of that, right? And he shouldn't be absolutely convinced of it, because he also walked through a very interesting example of the Great Depression. It took something like 20 years for the stock market to recover from the Great Depression. But Buffett's point is that even though he doesn't know what's going to happen in a couple years, 5 years, 10 years, he knows with 100% certainty, in his opinion, that the market will be higher in 20 years, right? So I don't think he's saying that he doesn't feel like it'll be higher sooner than that. He's just saying that, look, we don't know. There are examples of periods in time where it took a very long time to recover. And there are examples where it took a very short time to recover. But his main point and advice to all of us is that the right way to invest is to invest money where it doesn't matter to you what the market does in the short run. If you can wait out the market, even if it takes you 5 years, even if it takes you 10 years, even if it takes you 15 years, that's just noise, right? If you can hold your investment for long enough in the market, then you will come out a winner, right? And he also said that that only holds for a broad basket of stocks, not individual stocks, right? So our advice for members on that note was, if you're holding individual stocks and you don't understand the prospects of those companies, sell them and reinvest in an index fund, right? Because this is not the time for you to be holding individual companies if you don't understand the risk of holding those companies, because who knows what's going to happen. We could have another wave of COVID or whatever. So that's our opinion, and I think Warren Buffett is saying the exact right thing. For money that you can invest for 20 years and not worry about where it moves, no brainer, that should be put into an index fund, right? For money that you need sooner than that, then maybe you need to think through yourself, where do you think this market's going? Because, at least, a lot of smart people are not convinced that we're heading for, a very quick V-shaped recovery, right? So you need to come up with your own judgments on this too. But my advice would be, don't mess around with the equity markets if you don't have a long investment horizon. It's not worth the downside risk.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions. So you just want to wrap up.
Sahil, one more thing from the note that was related that you might want to talk about is that example he gave of 2 farms.
Sure.
Kind of related, yeah.
I mean, it's sort of related. I mean, I guess what Buffett, and for those that haven't read the note, I really encourage you guys to read the note, because it's hard to talk comprehensively. This is a very complicated issue that I'm just worried that people will take little tidbits here and there and make judgments off of that. But this is a comprehensive note that we've put together that really spells it out with all the risks and positives that we see. So please do take a read at the note, but I'll cover the farm example a little bit here. So the farm example that Buffett talked about was, he views the stock market almost like a special kind of farm that you could buy. And in this farm, you buy the farm, and there's this pesky little neighbor, right, who's next door that also owns a farm. And he keeps quoting a price to you that you can either sell the farm to him or buy the farm from him, right? And that's what the stock market's doing to you. Every day you can read a quote for your stocks, right? But for some reason, it messes with us psychologically in the stock market, but it doesn't if you had the farm, right? If you had the farm, you wouldn't care what your neighbor offers you for your farm. You would look at what the farm produces, and you would say, look, I'm getting this much income off the farm. As long as that hasn't changed, I don't care what this guy is offering me for my farm. Even if he's offering me half the price, I know it's just as valuable because I'm seeing the same amount of goods coming from the farm. But with stocks, because the quotes are all over the place, because you don't really, you don't see the products that the company produces in front of you, etc. It's easy to forget that. And as a result, we tend to do the wrong things and react to the price. The price should not dictate to you what to do. The price should dictate to you what the opportunities are in the market, right? Does the price make sense or not? The price doesn't tell you. Just because the price of a stock has gone down in half doesn't mean that stock is bad. You have to come to the conclusion, is the stock bad or not? If it's not, then you could actually buy more of the stock, right? So that's what Buffett was really driving at in the farm example. But please read the note. It's spelled out much more clearly there. And I think it'll be very, very instructive for people. But I'm glad people are engaging with the research notes, and I'm glad that these questions are coming in. We're doing our best to sort of give honest advice to everybody, because we're all in this situation together. We're all trying to make good judgments in very uncertain times. And the more debate we have around it, the better decisions we'll all make. So I also encourage people that read the notes and say, I didn't understand this, I didn't understand that, and I disagree about this, right? To write into us, because you may be right? We are all working in very, very uncertain times where the more we discuss and debate, the better conclusions we'll make. So I think with that, I think the questions are done. So great to have everyone on the call, and we will see you next week. And like I said, keep an eye out for our beginner series, which is going to be really, I think, really useful, not just for beginners, but also for advanced users in just breaking it down to very simple bare bones where the insights will shine through in a way that when you're looking at it at a complex level, you can't really catch, right? So look forward to discussing those. Thanks so much, guys. And we'll see you next week.